All right, everyone, back for more. Hooray. So now we're going to have our second panel of the day, ostensibly covering different topics, but also probably covering some of the same, but with perhaps in some cases a little bit of different perspectives. So that'll be good to hear. So I'm Sylvia Miller, and until December, I worked here at the Franklin Humanities Institute as director for scholarly publishing and research development, and spoke with faculty authors, especially junior scholars and graduate students, often about their publishing questions and their publishing plans based on my career in publishing. And not to go on and on, but I'll try to say just a few words for those of you who don't know me about in publishing, my experience. For 20 years, I was a publishing executive in New York at Macmillan, Scribner, and Routledge, which was very corporate, but at least when I was there, not exactly as Ken described. But it was a long time ago. Funny how when you've been around a long time, 20 years of your life goes by in one sentence. So there it was. Moving to North Carolina, I worked at UNC Press, directing a Mellon-funded project called Publishing the Long Civil Rights Movement. And at Duke, I managed the Consortium of Humanities Centers and Institutes, an international organization, before stepping into that publishing-related position where that did give me the opportunity to use my experience in scholarly publishing and grants to help faculty navigate the fellowship and publishing process. At the same time, I had the pleasure of working with Duke University Press to bring the Carlisle letters online to completion. Academically, I have a BA from UC Berkeley and an MA from Columbia University, both in comparative literature with a focus on poetry. Currently, I'm developing my own little publishing and consulting company called Arches Publishing, and very focused actually on book art and handmade books. So you can see my love of publishing and books threads through my whole career in its various stages. Now I'd love to introduce my two of my favorite editors who I get to have this panel together with. Courtney Berger is executive editor at Duke University Press. They joined the press in 2003 after receiving their PhD in English from Johns Hopkins University. Courtney acquires books across the humanities and social sciences. This is very interdisciplinary, including American studies, Native American and Indigenous studies, gender and sexuality studies, Black studies, Asian American studies, media and technology studies, and environmental humanities. Courtney seeks out books that are theoretically and politically engaged and that speak to a wide interdisciplinary audience. She has published books by many prominent scholars, but also enjoys collaborating with first-time authors who are in the process of establishing their critical voice. And I'd also like to add to this that Courtney participated with me for nearly a decade in a working group we called Publishing Makerspace. And it was about attempting to connect digital humanities scholarship with scholarly publishing. We're not officially planning to talk about digital humanities today, but if you have a question about D8 and book publishing, this panel is prepared to share thoughts in the Q&A. Answers might be going too far, but thoughts? All right. Now Gisela Fosado is the editorial director of Duke University Press and publishes books in a wide range of areas in the humanities and social sciences. She began her career at Duke University Press as editorial associate in 2010 and was named editorial director in 2020. She holds an AB from Princeton University and a PhD in cultural anthropology and a certificate in women's studies from the University Michigan. Before coming to Duke University Press in 2010, she served as the associate director for the Barnard Center for Research on Women. She has led several equity and inclusion initiatives within the scholarly publishing community. Our plan for this session is that I'm going to share several questions with Courtney and Gisela that I heard often when I worked here at FHI. Some of them might seem a little familiar from our earlier session. Advising faculty authors about book publishing. I expect that I'll chime in here and there on the answers as well as the questions, and the idea is that this will be a conversation. When we get to the end of our list of questions, we'll open it up to the audience, at which point you can ask any additional burning questions you didn't hear us discuss. So for now, please hold the questions for the Q&A. And I'll come over and sit over here now. Our little cafe table here. Can you still hear me? Oh, there we go. Takes a moment to come on, doesn't it? Okay. So our first question is, and this did come up some in the first session, what is the right time in the life cycle of my project to approach an editor? And I did indeed talk to a number of faculty authors here at Duke who would tell me that they had not yet approached a publisher because they wanted to finish the whole manuscript first. So I'd like to know how you would respond when they say that, and what you think about the right time in the life cycle of the project to first start talking with an editor.
Yeah, I mean, you heard the answer a little bit from Elizabeth, like, honey, please. There's no part of this process that you should try to do by yourself. You need to we recommend building a community, and you're going to need a community that helps you in all sorts of ways. You're going to need mentors. You're going to need to be in touch with your chair if you have a tenure track job and get their sense of things. You're going to need some writing buddies. Maybe you join a writing group. You're going to need just your own circle of friends that supports you, because there's going to be some ups and downs. There might even be some tears, but it's all going to be toward getting this dissertation transformed into something that impacts the world, and it's going to be in print for decades. And so it's huge. You're running a marathon. You're doing something that you've never done before, and you need a lot of different kind of expertise and support to go on that journey. And an editor is one of those people. So you don't want to bring them in when you're, so far down the road and you have this idea in your mind of what you're doing, because there might be things that you aren't seeing that other people would see. So that's why the mentors, the writing circle, like people who you're just chatting about your argument with, it's not just one person, but you're going to get little bits of support from different people. And the editor is one of those people who can be one of the people who tells you, oh, this part's really exciting. And, oh, I don't really see how this chapter fits, And so as many of those team members that you can gather, it's really going to help you. And we've talked a lot about, when it might be too early to approach an editor formally, but it's never too early if you go to conferences to go visit different booths to see if editors are there. If you have a dream press, and I know there's a question about how to figure out what that is. You want to start doing a little bit of stalking. Just come to our booth. Follow us on social media. Just figure out who we are.
What? Not the bathroom.
Not the bathroom or the swimming pool, but everywhere else. We want to be found. We want you to be talking about we want to talk about our books. We want you to buy our books. We want, every culture every press has a different culture. They're always, there are people at the booth. Sometimes they're not editors. Sometimes they're editorial associates or marketing people. We all want to talk about books. We all want to talk about the conference. So, don't be shy, because as Elizabeth was saying, we can't do our job unless we find authors. So, we want to find you and we want to be in conversation with you.
Yeah, I want to, before I get to the question, I want to pick up on the thread, of building your team, because this is something I talk about a lot when I do the dissertation to book talk, which is, at one point I had an author who said to me, I'm assembling my team to get this book done, and you're on my team. Also, their dance teacher, their therapist, their massage, and they had like this, they told me who their team was. And I was like, oh my gosh, yes, of course. It makes complete sense. And ever since then, I've thought about it that way. Like, what does it mean to assemble the team, for any part of your life? But here's a very big goal that you have. And like, what does it mean to like have people on your side and to have this support system that allows you to do the thing you want to do, right? And the editor is one of those people once you, of course, place the book with them, but I have conversations with people about books that I never do. They go to other presses and maybe they come back to me with a different project later on. I have an author I've worked with now on 3 books, and I turned down the first one that they sent to me. They came up to me at a conference and said, that was the nicest rejection letter I've ever gotten. Would you mind if I sent you a different, proposal? And I was like, of course. We started talking, we were at a cocktail party, whatever. And then it led to another project. So there's so many ways in which, you can have a conversation with an editor, build a relationship that you can lean on perhaps later on in your career. So anyway, that was an aside. But I mean, in terms of like when to approach an editor, it does sort of point to the fact that there are a lot of ways in to having a conversation with an editor and to figuring out how to approach a project. So Elizabeth and Ken talked about many of those: being at a conference, being in conversation, going to the booths, figuring out who is working on the books that are interesting to you, which presses, as well as which editors are doing that, and then figuring out the best way, and the right moment for starting that conversation. I do have people, as Ken said, sometimes you're talking to people while they're still working on their dissertation, and you have fruitful conversations about that. Sometimes it's too early, and really what you tell the person is, go finish that dissertation and then come back to me afterwards, right? Because you're not going to necessarily going to be able to have a good conversation about what the book is going to be. But it's still valuable, right? You know what I mean? To have that interaction with somebody and to get a sense of what they're working on. You had something else you wanted to say?
Oh, I was just going to say part of the networking thing. Like, there are so many people who you already know who've gone through this. And they, just when you're at conferences, talk to somebody who just finished writing their first book, or who's written a couple of them. And, I think a lot of people are happy to share their experiences. And that is what it's a really, writing to somebody and say, hey, I don't know if you're going to American Studies, but I just want you to know I read your book and I really loved it. And I'd love to talk about your work or whatever. I mean, there are ways you can. I think, it's easy to kind of, I feel like there's a lot of insecurity in people who are still developing their voice, developing their argument, but everyone's been there. And it's okay to not know exactly what you're saying when you're just starting off.
I wonder if this is the right moment for us to dip into the proposal controversy. Hot button. Well, there might be now. Hot button topic of the day. Only just because I do think that is the point often of interaction, right, with an editor. And so
Would the editor like to invite you to send them an actual proposal to follow up the conversation?
So it might be useful to think about that. I mean, to talk a little bit about what purpose the proposal can serve, right? Both informally and formally. Now, I think in the anti-proposal camp over here, they did come around to the fact that there were some actual benefits, to be had. I definitely warn people away from make work, right? No, the proposal is it's not busy work, right? Or when people, I'll say, oh, I don't need to know the marketing plan. That we create the marketing plan. I need to know what your book is about, who you're in conversation with, who it's for, what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish with this book. And so when I think about the proposal, there's two ways of thinking about it. One, I think about it as a mission statement for the author. That is their opportunity to say to themselves and to others, this is what I'm doing, and this is why I'm doing it, and this is why it's important. And I think that can be a really clarifying process for people. And then is also a point of conversation, right? So it is the point at which you can interact with colleagues and editors around your project and to get feedback. So when people write to me with that one paragraph and say, can we have a Zoom conversation? Usually what I'm writing back is saying, like, I want to see a proposal. I want to know, first of all, that it's a project that will be of interest to me. And also I want a point for us to be able to, a jumping off point for a conversation where I can start to dig into the project and say, like, oh, it feels like the main point of your whole book is buried here in your description of the conclusion. Like, why, like, perhaps we need to lift that bring it to the foreground. We need to lift that up and start the book from that point, right? And so you can actually have a really productive conversation about the architecture of the book and the ideas and the argument based on that proposal. So it doesn't need to be something perfect, but it definitely serves this point of, of productive conversation.
Yeah.
That authors I worked with found writing the proposal very clarifying for them. And so sometimes when they first came to my office, they couldn't really that clearly tell me what the book is and what it's for. And in fact, they wrote 4 pages before they got there, or they tried to describe the trajectory of the chapters. There are 5 or there are 7. Why are they in this order? Right? Maybe they shouldn't be, but sometimes just describing your book to someone, maybe I was playing what you called the Jimmy, right, for people. It can be very clarifying. And I've had people say, oh, going through this proposal process now, I actually know what I'm doing. I know where I'm going with this book. And the other thing I want to say about that is that your fellowship proposal is almost the same thing. So you need that for more than one thing. And before you've actually finished writing the book, because you need that fellowship to go finish writing it, right? But not every editor in a university press is a wonderful Courtney, Gisela, et cetera, who will read to the 4th page to find your buried point. So my major to do, or do versus don't in a proposal is try to eventually get to the point, and it's a process where you can state what the book is and why it's important at the beginning.
And I think what can be tricky is if you think, okay, I wrote my dissertation, I defended it, now I write my proposal. And, without actually knowing that your dissertation, the whole point of the dissertation, the takeaway of it's really a completely different thing. And you have to find that thing before you should start writing the proposal. So that, I think, is part of the problem. If you can start to get distance from the dissertation, start to, again, have those conversations with your team, with your mentors, like, this is one idea, this is one idea that I really am passionate about in this dissertation, and, getting people to riff with you and think with you and figure out, oh, these ideas are the ones that Jimmy thinks are really exciting. And I really, so then you can start to be like, okay, I think I'm starting to see what the main argument, what the main takeaway is going to be for the book. And you kind of have to start from scratch, forget whatever outline you had for your dissertation, and you're going to have to create a brand new outline of, okay, if this is my idea, if this is what I want what my book to do, this is how I might build it. So I think that's part of the problem, is that when there is so much emphasis on the proposal, people don't understand that there's a lot of work that has to happen before the proposal. And some of that work can be, if you can meet with an editor at a conference, part of that riffing can be done there, or it can be done in other spaces. But it's hard to go, if you're still in the dissertation phase, you don't really want to present that to an editor because it probably isn't something really exciting, like it's going to be a couple of years down the line.
The dissertation is not the book.
Yeah.
No, right. I mean, I think what Gisela is pointing to is that this is a process. And that's, it has to be taken seriously. Because when, I think what I encounter very frequently with people when they finish their dissertations is that there is, because of very real external pressures for getting a job, for getting tenure, for, for wanting a book contract, that people, that they do feel rushed to move to the book. And I do, within reason, of course, emphasize to people the importance of that moment between the dissertation and the reformulation of the book, and the value of thinking, honestly, that it can take some time to reformulate the dissertation into the book project. And it does take, it takes community, it takes perspective, it takes conversation. So frequently what's happening with, the dissertation is like, okay, you're like, I gotta get this thing done, heads down. You're not in conversation at that point so much. After finishing the dissertation and you're out back, at conferences, giving papers, whatever, whatever kind of situation you're in, you can start to find out what are the parts of what I'm doing that are interesting to people, what engages people, what questions are coming up, what are the sticking points, and to start to think about your project there as a book that will engage readers, right? That is not just you saying what you have to say, but you speaking to readers and hopefully getting something back as well, right? So that the book is part of a larger conversation. So I do really urge people to just value that part of the process and to recognize, to make space for it. Because if you don't make space for it at the beginning, you'll probably end up having to make space for it somewhere else further down the line after you get reader reports, for example. And it will be harder.
Yeah. Great. About that, it's interesting how much meeting people at a conference is coming up. Thank goodness it's not, the deepest pandemic situation anymore, right? I have often, I'll just emphasize something that Ken said earlier. I've often warned people that if you're going to a conference and you're planning to just stop by the publisher's booth, you're going to find that editor you were hoping to see isn't there because she's off having coffee with somebody who contacted her ahead of time. So just keep that in mind and don't be shy and write to them. They're thinking about making their appointments at the meeting. They want to hear from you ahead of time. And it's good to find a way to describe what you're working on in sort of half a page that you could maybe attach to the email rather than trying to send them a whole proposal just so you can have coffee. So those are just some practical things about that approach. Okay, so you have these publishers in mind. Wait a minute, let's take a step back. How did we get there? So I wanted to ask the two of you how an author might begin to form a list of publishers that might be interested in their book. What are some considerations? Should they have more than one in mind, and how might they prioritize them? Or sometimes junior scholars really don't have no idea, or they have a dream publisher and they can hardly imagine approaching them.
All right. So I think that the common response to this is like, look at your bookshelf. Okay, which isn't not necessarily a bad place to start to see which publishers are publishing the books that you're interested in. But I wouldn't be limited by that. You do, obviously, if you do go to in-person conferences, you will have an opportunity to see which publishers show up to those conferences. That might also not be the extent of the publishers publishing in that field, but it will at least give you a starting place of like, oh, here are the presses and the editors who are invested in the areas that I'm invested in. Let's start here. Let's see who's publishing work that I'm interested in. And of course, profiles on the website. Our profiles are all up with some of our recent books, with series that we work on as well. So that can give you insights. It's a dynamic landscape. What we publish, the areas we publish in as presses as well as editors, is constantly changing. So we might be invested in Latin American history quite heavily at one period and then less so later on. So you don't want to rely just on a historical, presence. You want to see what's happening right now. And that can happen through obviously going to the book booth, seeing what books are being published, going and looking at the profiles, talking to your colleagues. I don't know, I'm sure you
Yeah. And this is another thing to engage your team with. You want to know what your chair thinks. What do they think that the presses that I should be looking at? What about your, mentors, other people who've published in your field? What are their experiences with the editors at that press? And we're all people and we're all different and everyone's going to have a different experience, but it's good to just get a sense. The processes are different at different presses. And I think one of the, Duke Press is my dream press too, to work at. And I feel so lucky to work with these editors. I mean, you've seen how passionate and brilliant our editors are. And myself excluded. And and I just feel so, and you'll get a sense of different authors who work with editors and they'll tell you, oh my gosh, like Elizabeth gave me such great feedback. Courtney line edited my introduction. Ken responds to my emails and I've seen the emails that they send and they are so detailed and careful and they love their authors. They love their editors. You want to find an editor who is passionate about your project, who cares about you. And part of that is we all have different interests. So you want to have a sense, and you can look at websites, you can look at what presses have been publishing. And there are a lot of differences in presses. The way that we publish, we might, some presses might publish hardcover. Duke Press is really invested in publishing paperbacks that are affordable. We're also, we take a lot of care in so much of our process. I think we talked a little bit about this in the last panel. There are some presses that when they're trying to compete with us, what they'll say is, we're going to do it really fast. And we're going to do it. We're going to help you shape your book so that it makes a splash, so that people are talking about it, citing it, so that it really does push your disciplines forward, your areas forward. So we're not the fastest press, but we are, and it's not just us, it's not just the editor, it's the review process. I know some of the people who've been on our board. I mean, these reports that people receive, a dozen pages of these careful, there's just so much love from the editors, from the reviewers, from our editorial board members. I think there's a reason why we have a certain brand. There's a political investment with our books. There's just a sense of really trying to push our books to be as bold and innovative as possible. And all of that is just a gift to our authors. And so if you do want a quick, we might not be the fastest press, but you're going to have a really good book.
This is sort of a side quest, but just to go back to the question of like asking your department what presses they might value, or disciplinary and interdisciplinary questions about presses. This is something that comes up a lot for me. For example, I work in political theory. A lot of those people are housed in political science departments. What their departments think about what we publish and the press can vary quite a bit. Elizabeth works in sociology, so can have, some similar questions can come up. And so that does come up a lot. It's obviously important. So when people come to me and they say, well, I was talking to my department and they say that Cambridge is the best place to publish, right? Because I'm in political science or whatever. And so they're questioning whether or not I should publish with you. These are real questions that come up. And of course, they can feel quite urgent when you are on the tenure track and these decisions are in somebody else's hands. And so I do find myself navigating those questions with people a lot. I mean, my advice, putting other things aside, is that you should write the book for the audience you want, not for this small group of people who actually don't care about your book, because that feels like, that feels like it undermines your goals. And so I tell people, like, write for the people you want to be in conversation with, the people you want to invite you to give talks, the people who you want to invite you to apply for jobs, the people who for that audience. And that can be more important than a narrow disciplinary concern that your department might have. Now, I say that, of course, not as the person who's for tenure, but I do think it's important advice for people to hear, because you don't want to undermine your book, really, and your career in that way. So, no.
I was also just going to give a shout out to our junior editors who are building smaller areas in our list. And I remember when I was starting off as an editor, I only had 5 projects at a time that I was working on for my own list. And I was reading every draft of every manuscript. And so, every editor is going to give you something. I think junior editors are amazing as well. Definitely don't, there are just so many options. And there's not like one editor that you need to work with or one press that you need to work with.
That's important information. And I think, talking about the dream press, so because sometimes people do get a little caught up on that. And it can be important to think like, okay, it's not just one press or one editor who might be the right fit. So sometimes you might find an editor at a press you hadn't been expecting who is going to be the champion for your book. And they're going to work really hard, and they are going to make sure it gets noticed, and they are going to really put their effort into that. And that can be super valuable and could be more valuable than the press you thought was the right fit. So both press and editor matter in that
Right.
respect. So I think it's important to be open-minded, and for sure, when you are starting to reach out to editors to have these conversations, I do think it's good to meet with, multiple editors, to get a sense of how different presses are and different editors are thinking about your book, thinking about how it will be out in the world. You know what I mean? Just getting that input from editors can help you think about like, oh, this is the book they're imagining. And this is how they're thinking about it on their list. This is how they think it will get out into the world. And does that match, your vision?
Yeah, that's such an important aspect of conversations, and feeling that you're comfortable with that person and they see they understand what you want to do, and that is what their understanding is indeed what you want to do, and they can be your partner to work together. And so sometimes you might think a certain press could be very important for you, and just recently, I talked to someone who went to a conference, and a number of presses were actually interested in talking with her. And this one was not Duke, very important press, just stood in the middle of the booth with all the people coming in and out and jostling and said, okay, go. And it was sort of like she was supposed to do her elevator speech. And she found it so off-putting and condescending, she didn't want to work with them, right? So, good to know. So, and other experiences were totally different, and she's, going in a different direction.
And it's really okay to be open about that when you're meeting with an editor and say, I'm meeting with several editors here. I really want to get your take. I think just having that disclosure is really helpful, especially when you get further along. And say I solicit a manuscript and I want to send it out for review. At that point, it's really important to kind of say, oh, well, this other press also solicited the manuscript. So then we can kind of make an informed decision, because it's some presses do have policies where they don't want to have simultaneous submissions. And you're really building a relationship with the editor. You don't want to have, them go through so much effort, offer a contract, and then surprise, actually, I have several other presses that are offering contracts, and now I'm going to try to, negotiate or something. You just want to be open. It's a relationship.
When they're starting to invest a lot of work in it, it's probably time to really make a priority and not let multiple editors invest a lot of work. It's just a courtesy.
Yeah, there's some clear lines. At the very beginning of the process, when you're sending proposals and queries out to editors, you're not really under any obligation to say who else you're talking to or what, you can just, sometimes people will say, I'm in the first stages, I'm reaching out to publishers, I'm reaching out to several publishers right now to find out who's, interested in the project, to get a sense of the fit. I think that's helpful to know. I think it's helpful when somebody writes to me and says, I'm sending it to you first, because I really, I'm excited about your list. I feel like this could be a good match. I wanted to send it to you first. That's meaningful. You know what I mean? When somebody says that and you think, okay, wow, all right, this person's been paying attention. I still may say no, but I'm going to give it, you know what I mean? I'm going to think about it in that way, to be like, all right, why? Why did they think this was the right fit? Hopefully they said something about that in their cover note. So at that stage, it's quite open in terms of how you share that information with the editor. As you progress, it becomes much more formalized as to what you need to say when. Once people are soliciting the project for review, that is the point in which you need to be quite clear with everybody you are in conversation with about what the status of the project is, right? So if you've sent the proposal to 3 publishers and 2 of them have written to you and said, I want the full manuscript, I want to send it out for review, then you need to be telling those 2 editors, okay, another press is also solicited for a review. What is your policy? Are you okay with simultaneous submission? At that point, the editors are going to tell you how they're thinking about it. And you might have to make a decision. One of them might say, I'm okay with simultaneous submission. The other one might say, I'm not. Right. And at that point, you're going to have to decide, okay, what do I want to do? Do I want to go with the one press, or do I want to tell them, oh, the other press was okay with simultaneous submission? I mean, you're going to have to be upfront about it at that point. Once you're at that point, then, like if I agree to simultaneous submission, then I will say, yes, this is fine. I would like you to wait until you have both sets of reports before you make a decision about which press you're going with. Just so that we have a fair chance to get the book. And so, you've opened up the lines of communication at that point. So you're hoping that you're having an open conversation on both ends, right?
I have seen where some junior scholars get so anxious because there is so much anxiety. It's a tough process, and they just spread their proposal to a dozen a dozen publishers, and that can and yet in their mind they have like 1 or 2 dream presses, and that can really be tough because some of the presses might get back to you and start asking, okay, I want to get it under contract. And then you're in a position where you might have to nudge your dream press and be kind of hounding them. And that's kind of not a great place to be. So don't do that. Maybe just start out with, if you have one press you really want to publish with, just start with them. Maybe then, or 2 or 3, definitely don't get yourself in
conversations with 2 or 3, but that might help you narrow it down right there.
Right. And you're going to be faced with if you do send out that many or even a couple, you'll get faced with other questions as well. So as Elizabeth sort of gestured towards with first books, we are almost always sending out a full manuscript. And so if you send a proposal to 2 presses, one press might be like, okay, I'm ready to send the proposal out and sample chapters out. And I might say, I want to see the full manuscript. And so you might have to, that's another decision point, right? Okay, what do I want to do? What's most important? When authors come back with that question of like, well, could you send the proposal out? I explain to them why. Really, I try to be as upfront as possible about these things. Why do I insist on the full manuscript? Because in my experience, what first-time authors need the most is feedback on the project as a whole, how the book holds together as a book, the architecture of the argument, whether or not something is hidden somewhere else, the setup, the introduction, all these things. That is, for a first book, almost always the most valuable input that people are getting from the review process. And I do not think that people get that from the proposal and sample chapters. What they tend to get is somebody saying, yes, you should go do that. Because most people at that stage are quite comfortable with the chapter length argument. So they might be writing quite lovely chapters, but if they fit together as a book, that won't yet be apparent. And so getting that feedback, I have seen authors get derailed by this, sending out a proposal, getting positive reports. I get the full manuscript back. I send the full manuscript back to readers. The readers suddenly have pages and pages of notes of like what they should be doing. And it can derail an author who was like, but they liked it. And they saw their proposal and what's wrong now. And you're like, there's nothing wrong other than now it's a book and you're going to have to do this additional work. So that is my rationale. Of course, that might not fit everybody's timeline or needs. And so it's, as an author, you just have to assess like, what's the right next move for me?
On occasion, people need a contract for a tenured dossier, right? And they haven't finished the book. And so they'll work with the press that will, in fact, send out for review sample chapters and a proposal. So not all presses treat that the same way. So it's something to know about them. Another thing that's interesting that Gisela gestured toward when you said that the Duke University Press tends to focus on paperbacks that normal people can actually afford to buy or use in their courses. And that might be something you dream of, and it could be that a press that's interested in your book, this could be a point of comparison in addition to, is this an editor I want to work with? You might look at their website and see that actually all of their books are priced at $100 hardcover, because basically that means that they sell only to libraries, or that's what they focus on. So sometimes if your topic is very narrow and it's just not going to be the kind of book that we've been talking about that might work in paperback or work for courses, then that might be a fine choice. I'm not saying there's something necessarily wrong with that. If you go on WorldCat and you look up your book and you find that, at least in ebook form, it's all over the world in libraries, and so it can be found. That's not terrible. But if your expectation, you might be disappointed by that if you had a different expectation. So it's just something to be aware of. Different companies really have very different business models. They work different ways. Some publish an expensive hardcover for libraries to start off with and then come out with a paperback after they've kind of made their money from the poor libraries under all these pressures that Ken was talking about, and have less and less money to buy books.
I just wanted to touch a little bit on, you mentioned some people need a contract. It is important to kind of think about the differences between these advanced contracts and the final contracts that we issue. There are presses that are very eager to just get things under contract, and those contracts aren't always binding both ways. They bind the author to the press, but they don't necessarily bind. So a lot of times those contracts end up not working out. I think as we've talked about, we don't send things out. We're very careful to wait to send things out until we really feel like it's a good project for the press. So I think there's a lot of gray in the tenure process, and no one's ever going to tell you this is exactly what you need to do to get tenure. Sometimes we provide letters that indicate that we're invested in a project, and that can really serve the same purpose as an advanced contract. It's strong interest. I've committed to sending it out for peer review. We've had several meetings. And that really is all people need. So
and that can help you get a fellowship too, that
Yeah.
letter.
Yeah, so there's all kinds of ways, and I think our goal is not to just have numbers and be cranking out tons of books each year, but to choose books that we think are building our list and are really influential within their disciplines.
Yeah, I mean, I tell people all the time, I offer contracts on the vast majority of the books that I send out for peer review. And the reason for that is because as an editor, as a group, we spend a lot of time with authors, working with them, getting the manuscript to a place where we feel confident that it's going to do well in the peer review process. So that relationship that you're building with an editor over time from whatever point, until the manuscript goes out for peer review, I mean, it can be years, right, of conversation, of back and forth, of looking at chapters or looking at a proposal, of getting the manuscript to a place where I say, yeah, let's send this out. And when I say that, you know what I mean? I'm not saying that, I'm saying that to very few projects. And most of the time I'm able to offer a contract after that first round of review. And I would say then if it is a revised and resubmit, which does happen, I would say the vast majority of those end up at contract after the second round of review. So, those are the kinds of conversations you want to have with an editor as you're moving through the process. You should hope that you're able to have an honest conversation with editors about the process, about how it goes, about what the possible outcomes are, what the likely outcomes are, why they do the process the way that they do it. I mean, I see my job as an editor as one of helping authors to write the best version of the book that they can write, and the version of the book that we can hopefully get out into the world and get read. So to, bringing those two goals together. So, your editor is on your side in that part of the equation. Yeah.
I've seen some of these peer review processes from some of the big presses that publish hundreds of books a year, and it's like a thumbs up, thumbs down. You're not going to get detailed feedback. They're trying to see, okay, I'm going to get 5 reports from 5 different people and see if we should publish this book. So it can be a very different process for some of those presses.
Yeah, I mean, in the peer review process, it can be scary. It is a hoop, but it's also supposed to be productive, right? It is supposed to be something that helps us make decisions about what we publish and helps authors improve their books and to make sure that their book is going to be received and engaged with in a positive and productive way when it's published.
And Ranji mentioned earlier that here at FHI, there's the Book Manuscript Workshops program, and Duke faculty authors can apply for it. That's a wonderful kind of a peer review in-person conversation. And an editor is always there, and we always think that's a very important element. So that's another opportunity for Duke authors to have an early round of peer review that's very productive. They're always a little bit nervous to have peer review in person, but I've always found it's very, very constructive and warm, supportive atmosphere. And also, that's a wonderful program that's here, but if you're not at Duke, it's still a wonderful model, and you could potentially work with your department to set up a workshop like that.
Yeah, do you want to talk a little? I mean, this comes up a lot, a question of like a book manuscript, when to have it, right? Because more and more people are doing book manuscript workshops before peer review. And my experience is that that's an incredibly helpful part of the process, and that it makes the peer review process go more smoothly when people do it in advance. So if you have the resources and if you have the time, I think it's a worthwhile thing to do. I mean, I tell people it's sort of peer review light, right? Because it is in person. You are going to get, people are going to frame some of their suggestions and feedback different than they might in an anonymous peer review. Not to say that people are mean in peer review, just that like they might deliver criticism straightforward in a more straightforward manner. But you're going to get, a group of people focusing on your book and giving you, constructive feedback. So it sort of gives you an advanced sense of what might happen in peer review. So when people do that in advance, typically what I tell them is like, all right, have the book manuscript workshop, a lot time to integrate some of the feedback that you get. Because you want to, if you get feedback and you're like, okay, yeah, I need to do that. Yeah, I need to do that. Well, then you should do those things. It's pretty straightforward. This is what I tell people all the time. It's just like, because people are like, when you're asking yourself, do I really like need to do like, oh, what work should I do before it goes out? I'm like, ask yourself, do I know I need to do this? And if the answer is yes, then you should probably just go ahead and do it. If you are not sure, if the answer is I don't know, and that is also a legitimate answer, like you have a manuscript workshop and somebody says, oh, you should put chapter 3 up in front, and somebody else says, no, you should restructure this way, and you actually are not sure which of those would be the right approach, then maybe that is not an avenue you need to go down before a peer review. Maybe then you're like, okay, let's have the peer reviewers help me sort that problem out. But if somebody says you really need to, and you're like, oh yeah, do it. So allot the time for that. And then, you will find that the peer review process goes more smoothly, and also that the peer reviewers can focus on the issues that really matter. Because, you want the book and the manuscript to be in good shape when it goes out to readers. That doesn't mean it's perfect. You want to leave space for revision and change and to be able to be responsive to the feedback that you get. But also, the more your manuscript looks and feels and reads like a book, the more it's going to be treated as such by the peer reviewers. And that is both, conceptually and actually in very minor ways. If the notes are incomplete, the bibliography is a mess, all these things, that is going to get noticed and can irritate readers. And that irritation can linger as they are reading it, and can affect how they respond. Sure, everybody can relate to that feeling. So just the more polished it looks, the more it feels like a book, the more seriously people are going to take it, and the deeper the feedback you're going to get is. So I think that's important just to think about in relating to your own work and how you frame it.
Of workshops besides this peer review style workshop that we're talking about now, Gisela mentioned writing groups. It doesn't mean that you wouldn't maybe workshop a chapter or an introduction and 3 chapters or something like that. That's just a different kind of working session. And maybe you want to have all of those.
Any of them help. And really, when people do this kind of work, I agree. The review process just goes so much more smoothly, because you've already had these readers tell you what the big problems are. So yes, it doesn't have to be a workshop. It can be just people reading chapters, but get Get your team, get feedback for sure.
Get feedback. I mean, I think that's, for all authors in, treating yourself like a writer that you are, is also remembering that your work needs to be out there, and people need to be reading it, and you need to be getting feedback. I mean, I say this from a place of love and also of experience, which is that, I definitely, my grad student experience was one where feedback was feared. I was in a program where people sometimes gave their honoraria back because speakers gave their honoraria back because they had been so abused by. Um, so so I did not see circulating your work and getting getting feedback from your peers as a constructive situation. So I truly understand the fear that comes with that, but also it doesn't serve you, basically. And so the more you can open up, the more you can feel able to share your work, to get feedback at different stages from different people and different environments, the stronger writer you will become, and the more confident writer you will become, and the more able you will be to confidently assert your ideas rather than hiding behind citations and scholarly apparatus, or citational armor, as I tend to call it. And so I think that's just an important part of the process as a writer, and definitely as a scholarly writer. And I'm sorry that I've said negative things about my graduate student program, but I don't think that it will come as a surprise.
Some programs are some programs are already notorious.
Yes, exactly. Its reputation is known.
Well, I just wanted to point out again that it's so important to be in conversation with an editor through all of this process. And even when you have a book manuscript workshop where you're getting feedback and someone says, "Oh, I think the perfect thing would be to move the chapter 5 to the beginning," and other people say, "No, it wouldn't." That's a very simple comment, but your editor is there to help you sort through what you hear. And the same thing with those long written peer reviews that the press eventually gets for you. They're not just going to send those to you with no comment, right? They're going to help you understand them and prioritize the recommendations.
Yeah.
How long do we have?
Yeah. Question.
Yeah, let's do it.
I think. Do we have? Or do we want? We can use this one.
Oh, okay. Yeah. For the people on Zoom, we need to keep using mics. Where was the question?
There's one here.
Raise your hands again.
I had sort of a clarifying question because I feel like I've received contradictory advice over the course of your presentation. As a first-time author. So let's say I were interested in Duke University Press and I had a book proposal and I submitted it to you and you liked it, or we had a conversation at a conference and then I had written up the proposal and submitted it to you. Presumably your next step would be to write me back and say, yes, we'd like to see the manuscript. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
So probably I should have a complete manuscript when I approach you.
No, you should have a timeline though. I do tell people that you should have a clear timeline.
And it shouldn't be like 3 or 4 years or 5 years.
For your first book, it shouldn't be. I mean, maybe, further down the line. Yes. So if, it is a very interactive process. I'll just say that. We have a conversation, we're at MLA, we have a conversation. So that sounds great. Please send me the proposal. I look at it, I say, this looks great. I would love to see the full manuscript when it's ready. Now, typically in your proposal, you will have some of these details, right? So a time, like the length, images you're expecting to have and a timeline. So in there, you might say, I expect to have the full manuscript ready in 6 months. Now, as editors, we take all these statements of when a project is going to be ready with a grain of salt. But it does give you a starting point, right? So the editor can say, yes, please send me the full manuscript when it's ready. Or, hey, let's meet and talk, right? Let's have a Zoom meeting, talk more about the project, to talk about the process, to go through it, where you'll have an opportunity, hopefully, to ask questions. Hey, what happens next? What happens after I send you the full manuscript? And we outline this. We all have a 15-minute spiel I think we can give on like, this is what happens next. But the editor should be able to tell you, once I receive the full manuscript, I'm going to read it. I'm going to tell you, yes, I would like to send this out for peer review. I'm going to ask for recommended readers. This is, I'm going to seek out 2 readers. This is the time period. But you can also ask those questions too if you feel like they're not being answered.
But it doesn't sound like you weigh in sort of on the process of drafting the manuscript between the sort of proposal and the manuscript. We don't like send you a couple chapters and you come back and say, I think this is working, and it isn't.
It varies.
Okay.
So typically when somebody's sending sometimes you're just getting a proposal and that's all we're seeing and that's the conversation. Sometimes somebody's sending sample chapters, and so feedback might be on the sample chapters. Sometimes in the course of conversation, somebody might say, well, would you look at this chapter for me and see what you think? I'm often offering to read people's introductions. I feel like that's the place where I have the most impact, where I can really tell somebody if the book is being set up well. I can give really specific feedback. So that might come up and I'll be like, oh, when you get the introduction ready, send it to me. I'll give you some feedback. So, you might be closer to having a full manuscript. So it is interactive, and it's not, there's not usually just one, like one path. Now, sometimes it does happen where I say, send me the full manuscript was ready. And the next time I hear from somebody, it's the full it's the full manuscript. That does happen as well. Or we're meeting at the conference in between there. I'll be in American Studies. Do you want to meet up in American Studies? Yes. Like, we'll check in there and see how things are going. So it can take a lot of different forms.
And sometimes we'll have comments on the proposal. Like, I really love this idea. The topic is so important. I'm not sure about the sequence of I'm not sure you need chapter 6. Are you sure? How do you see that fitting in? Or so that it's hard to predict, because it's the start of a conversation. You're telling me what you're trying to do, and then I might come back with suggestions or say, yes, can you send me a couple sample, if you haven't sent the chapters, I might want to see the chapters, then I'll solicit the full man. So it's hard to say exactly.
So often that relationship or that ongoing conversation does affect your writing and how that full manuscript is going to turn out. Not always, but often.
I think the important thing is that you feel empowered to ask questions along the way. Because sometimes we don't know to fill in the gaps because we don't know there was a gap to be filled in. You know what I mean? So I think almost all editors, as soon as they're asked a question, will have we'll have plenty of answers to offer. But I always want authors to feel empowered to ask those questions, to ask questions about things they don't know. You know what I mean? I don't know how this process works. And most of us are very attentive to that. They're like, okay, we know when somebody's going through the process for the first time, and sometimes the second people forget too. There's a lot of amnesia. Like, they're on their 3rd or 4th book, and they're like, "What do you mean it has to go out to readers?" Or like, we worked together before, so you will be well within bounds to ask all these questions.
And once we solicit more, it really is you should feel free to say, I'd love to jump on the phone. I'd love to jump on a Zoom. I have some questions, because we've already said we're interested. We want to keep talking to you. We want to help you get to the next step. So once you get that green light, you can say what your needs are and what information you need.
So once you're sort of interested in a proposal, you are offering to then be sort of a sounding board for the rest of the process.
And
that's the relationship.
And there are some authors who ask, oh, could you read every chapter as I write it, or, and give me feedback? And whereas I used to be able to do that often, I often can't. And so, but I'll be very honest with that, or I'll say, especially with first time authors, like I really want to give as much of my time as I can. And if I can read at least one chapter and give detailed notes, I'll try to do that. So it really is case by case. And we want to help you achieve. And if I can't do it, I also have a lot of recommendations of resources and different things that can help first time authors.
I think she answered the same question.
Thank you. So, is it helpful or not helpful if when you send a proposal, to send like another piece of writing that may not have anything to do with what you're sending, but is published in a edited volume that shows more of your voice, that kind of shows what your style of writing is gonna be versus a dissertation chapter that is very not what your voice is? Does that help or does that hinder?
Definitely don't send the dissertation chapter. But I think it could generally no. Generally, we really want a revise. If you're going to send sample chapters, we want them to be the revised, like this is what the look and feel is going to be of this chapter. But I can imagine times when it could be helpful if you're writing creatively, or if you're, there could be reasons why it might be helpful to have different published books. But in general, when you're going to send samples, it really is a sample of that project.
Also, this is my opportunity to give a pitch for your paying attention to your CV. I love people's CVs and often read them very early. Like I'll start digging into a proposal and then I'll look into somebody's CV because it does give me a sense of who you're in conversation with, other things you've published, venues that you're publishing in, what conferences you're going to, just to sort of get a sense of like where you and your ideas and your work are circulating. So that type of, this is to bring it back to your question. I would see things like that. Oh, look, they have some poems published here. They have some creative pieces here. They've done something in LARB. They've done whatever. You know what I mean? I start to get this kind of picture of the person as a writer and as an intellectual. And then also, sometimes I will see other projects. So there'll be other projects listed. I'll be like, oh, that project sounds really interesting. Oh, where you're like, you know what? I don't think this project's for me, but you're working on this other thing. I'd love to talk to you about that.
That happens to me all the time.
So don't underestimate the power of the CV.
That kind of it makes me feel like we should circle back to the proposal, because what I think a lot of us are looking for when we're seeing our new submissions, we have a submission portal on our website and we go through all of them. We're just looking for that really exciting idea, that really, something that's going to be like, oh my gosh, I hadn't thought of that. Or that's such a cool archive, or that's such a different approach, or, so it's that really, like, trying to spend hours and hours on comparable books or on, the market, the audience for the book. I'm not going to get to page 10. Put it all on page 1 and 2. Like, I want to know what are you doing that should make me excited about your book.
Oh. Well, sorry. I'm supposed to be a rapper or something. I have been. Thank you for informing me about the possibility of a dishonorarium. Oh my God. At home with me right there. Dare you ask me that question? I have an interesting intersection or assemblage. Do we even say intersection anymore? I have an interesting assemblage of intelligences, wherein I come out of Middle Eastern studies, linguistics, critical theory, and race talk, all frowned upon by the current administration. But given my audiences, right? My audiences, I got some people, they don't respect it. They don't respect what I'm talking about unless you say this come from the Quran or this come from the Prophet, and you got to put a footnote with Arabic right there. Then you got to translate it. And then I write for people who don't respect it unless an old white man said it before you, and you got to put his name on it. And then I got some people who don't respect it unless you're like taking an absolutely anti-institutional bent. And this all fuses in a very particular intellectuality, which finds its home in this very room, but doesn't necessarily translate to consumable literature and citation when you're talking about formatting in a book that's written for non-academics. And so, like, how would you recommend I fuse like a classical Arabic traditional standard of citation with a contemporary American academic standard of citation that is still readable, legible to non-academics?
Yeah. All right. I'm trying to think of the best way to approach. Some version of this question comes up a lot in talking about interdisciplinary scholarship. So so I'm not sure if I can answer your specific question, but I'm going to start there and maybe we can get further. Which is that question of like, how do I please a lot of different people coming from different, quarters? That comes up a lot. And I think that, my main advice for people is not to write defensively. I think that, because I think that's the first approach people take. It's like, well, I've got to like stop this person from questioning this and this person questioning this person, you know what I mean? And like, and it's like, you're just putting up barriers as opposed to sort of productively synthesizing, ideas and strains of thinking in a way that's new and represents your thinking, So I guess that's really I think that's my short answer, is to just not come at it from a defensive position, but from a productive one. Now, the general reader questions, I think.
There's no general reader.
Right. And just, can you talk about the tendency? I have a tendency to oversight, like over-citation, can you talk about that, please?
Don't do it.
Just hearing that at night now.
I think especially for junior scholars, you're so insecure. You're trying to make sure, look at all these people, this is how I came up on this thought. But it really is, I think that's part of the process of writing a first book is developing your voice, developing your confidence, feeling like you are an expert and an expert enough to be able to make claims and you don't have to cite everybody. And going back a little bit to your other question, your book is not going to be for everyone. And we were talking about Jimmy, you're going to have to pick a few Jimmys and figure out, okay, these are the people who I'm really trying to make this argument for. What do they need to know? Do I need to maybe explain some of these things about these other fields that they might not know about, but so bring them along, but you're not going to be able to bring everyone along. There's no one who's going to read every single book out there and get them.
Sometimes if it's very interdisciplinary, you do want to have a little bit of a prioritization in mind.
This also, this came up, Ken brought this up with the cutting room floor kind of metaphor, which is that, you can't overwhelm your readers. So it's just a different way of coming at this question. And this comes up, this is where when I give people feedback on the introduction, this is often one of the key pieces I'm telling them, is that, when you write an introduction, you need to be giving the readers the tools they need to read your book. But there's only so many tools you can carry So if they are weighed down with so much information that they cannot move forward, you know what I mean? You're not going to feel motivated, right? You're not going to be motivated to move forward. So you need to give them enough, right? Enough historical context, theoretical context, you know, insight into the arguments, insight into the theories and methodologies that drive your work, or where you're intervening. Enough to help them understand what the book is trying to do, but without overwhelming. So I think it's just finding that balance. So if the citations are weighing it down and making it so that it feels like, oh, I just want you to know that I've read and attended to everything, then your reader's going to feel that, right? They're going to be like, oh my God, I was here to find out what you thought, not what everybody else thought. So I think it's sort of a mindset thing, but it's also a revision thing. It's pretty hard to accomplish that in the first pass. One exercise I give people for their introductions when they are facing this problem is to write a 5 or 10 page version of their introduction with no citation. So what do you know? Just write it. Just sit down and say, this is what I'm arguing. This is what I'm trying to tell you. It doesn't mean you can't reference things, of course, but they should be up here, right? Lay it out there. And then you can always backfill with the citations as they're needed. But when you do that, you've stripped away all the things that you're better authorizing your work and instead writing it yourself.
And it comes up like 90% of the reader reports for first books. We call this dissertationese. It's just like certain things that just people do, and it's a process of really stripping that down and getting your voice across.
And same for proposals and fellowship proposals. Don't have a ton of footnotes in them.
Oh, sorry. Hi, thank you so much. This has been like so informative and amazing. Thank you. One text that you all have published that I really love is Alexander Wahelier's Phenon monograph. And the kind of curated Spotify playlist I remember stuck with me so much. That was kind of, in relation to the chapters. And it kind of got me thinking as a new author about things like kind of this kind of paratextual kind of material, and how as a new, a first-time writer, you balance pitching things like that. I mean, a lot of our dissertation projects, are so, they have this tons of media objects or tons of all that types of stuff, and we want to make that come to life. But we don't want to be like overwhelming, or maybe just have it be like, figure in a book. Like we want to have things like companion websites even that are not necessarily related. So what does that process look like when you're in the kind of pitching process of dealing with that paratextual kind of information?
Yeah, we encourage people. This kind of gets a little bit to we touched a bit on the finances and how some of the things that make publishing really hard. We invest between $45,000 to $50,000 on every book we publish, including staff time. I mean, there's a big investment, and sometimes there are these things that make that investment even harder. And we talked about how sometimes we require subventions for those. Like if people want to write a 400, 500 page book, or have 100 images, or have color. And this kind of falls a little bit into that category. And so one of the things that we really encourage people to do is to think about those as separate but related elements. And there can be one, so we have experimented, especially 10 years ago or so. We had quite a few projects that I know you've worked on, where we tried to have QR codes and have them be really interactive. And it's complicated for us as publishers. But we have a lot of books that have these amazing companion websites, and we can have the link. It does require the author to kind of commit to keeping that up and being fully in charge of all of those materials and making sure that copyright's not an issue for those materials. But they're wonderful for readers, and it still keeps the book for those who just want to read the book and not be going back and forth. It makes the book work on its own, so they can each be standalone. And it's a great teaching companion.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of balancing the imaginative aspects of this. Sorry, I can't see the person. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Um, balancing these imaginative, generative ideas, which our authors present to us, which are exciting and push us in new directions. I mean, to be completely honest, like we're often responding to these ideas that authors have that help us think of new ways of that scholarship is happening and how our books get read and thought about. So that's like that's exciting, I think, for us as editors. And then there's the realism of like, okay, well, what is this going to cost? And also, how are we going to sync this up with the book? So when people are doing companion sites, the first thing I tell them is like, really think about this. Like, are you, if you want a companion site to appear at the same time as a book, you're going to be doing two major projects at the same time. Do you have the bandwidth for this? You know what I mean? Do you truly have the bandwidth for it? Because it's pretty hard to coordinate those two things, even if they're independent, you know what I mean? But if you want them to appear simultaneously, I've only worked with one person who was able to make that happen. And they had many years already into the digital project, in order to enable that. But smaller things like playlists and, you know what I mean, like things that just bring attention to the book and are creative and get people interested and exciting are, I mean, I think those are fabulous. And I don't know, our marketing person might say something like, thumbs up.
Honestly, basically, hello. What Gisela said is like the main thing. And I think for marketing, the biggest things that we see is links that die or materials that don't stay active. Like, yeah, you can do a Spotify playlist, but who knows in 2 years that such and such artist decides to pull down that album. So you deal with a lot of link rot that becomes a big issue. The other real cautionary tale is, the enhanced ebook trend surged and then it died real fast. University of Chicago Press, I think, did this really, really cool ebook on gemstones. And boy, was that an expensive learning lesson that they had to learn. And they put a lot of investment in that and it just didn't work. But yeah, the paratextual stuff I think is really cool and it's a fun marketing tool. But the more that it can stand alone in a book as a like, hey, I'm talking about this song, you can go find that song on your own, I think is valuable.
Yeah, and definitely for larger digital projects, it does need to have what I call a forever home. So you need to partner with a library or someplace that's really going to house it for the long term.
Right, especially if you're going to put links in the book to the online thing.
No matter what, if you're doing a digital project, you want that.
Right.
Got time for another question? Or did you want to talk about Phoenix?
Thank you so much. This has been so helpful. I have I guess a follow-up question about the difference between, because the way you're talking about a proposal, a lot of this sounds like a really compelling introduction. So at what point, like what makes a compelling introduction to you? What makes a compelling proposal to you? And also, how early should I make my point? These are I heard first 2 pages, but I was wondering, like,
in the proposal or the introduction?
Maybe both. Like in the case, I know in the proposal you should be like, because 1 paragraph, so I had to get to the point very quickly. But I guess in the introduction, so my work kind of thinking about Japanese visual culture, like, obviously good things popular, but not everyone is in the know. So I wonder how much context to give before I be like, hey, here is my big pitch about, something that's interesting.
There are so many ways to have an amazing introduction. And I find it fun to just collect them like we're reading a lot of introductions and I kind of keep a file. I'm like, oh, I want to read that later. Like, because there's just so many ways that you can hook the reader in. There's also, so I think looking at introductions that have really worked well for you and for your area could be a way to start. Definitely don't wait till page 20 to let the reader know, but even 15, you kind of want it in the first 10 pages to really give the reader a sense of what your book is doing or what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all this. There's a lot of different, looking at models, definitely important. And it does depend, I mean, because some people are able to offer compelling opening examples, anecdotes, readings that really open the book up. And when somebody can do that, it can be compelling, right? Oh, I don't know this material, but you're introducing this example to me where I get hooked in, and then you start to tell me what the book is about through that example. And then I'm engaged, right? And I'm excited about this material. That can be winning. And maybe you're a couple pages in before you actually like nail it down with that paragraph that says this is what I'm doing, right? Other people just they just start, that's the first thing they say. And that can be compelling too, like to know like, hey, like somebody's laying it down for you. They're staking a claim right from the beginning. And and they want, and maybe it's a challenge. And you're going to follow that. So there's a lot of different ways of doing it. And I would say that introductions are what people rewrite the most during the course of the process, right? Like up until the very end, up until the board
After
approval.
the rest of the book is done, you're
You know what I
coming
mean?
back and
People are
redoing
coming
the
back, right?
introduction.
To figure out the best way to bring people on board.
Thank you so much. I'm still in the dissertating phase, so all this has been like a brave new world for me. So my question is very simple. It's how many first books are often dissertations? Or because I feel like a lot of anecdotes have been thrown around being like, oh, it takes many years before the dissertation morphs into a book. So I'm just wondering, is dissertation to book a very natural trajectory, or like what is the timeline on that?
The timeline, oh gosh, it can vary so much. And we publish a third of our books are actually first books, and the vast majority of those are coming from a dissertation in some way. And some of them can look very similar. I actually did have one first book project that I worked on where it was just minor revisions, but that's just the one. Then there's the hundreds of others. So, it can happen, but don't count on it. But just it really depends. Like some people just want to really shift it. They just might use a little bit of material. Some people just feel like they have to do a bit more research and write a couple other new chapters. So that process can just really can vary. Sometimes people have postdocs and they have that time to really have some distance, be reformulating and thinking. Some people just don't have the time, and so it all, there's a lot of variation.
Yeah, I mean, right. Most first books will originate in the dissertation in some form because you've spent this years doing this research, and it's usually going to serve as the foundation for a book, even if it gets reframed, even if you go in a different direction. There are people who completely abandon the dissertation and start over, and it's not always, I mean, it doesn't always waste your time to do that. I mean, I've seen people who have been like, no, the dissertation isn't working, the project isn't working, it's not being, they're not able to transform it into a book very well, and starting over with something new can be more economical, yes, and freeing, right? And motivating, right? Because it's a long process. You have to add in all the years you worked on the dissertation, all the years you worked at, to revising the dissertation into the book project, into revising that manuscript, until publication. It's a lot of years. So if you're not excited about it, you're not motivated, it can be really hard. There are people who also, like, their second book becomes their first book. So they'll start working, they'll have the dissertation, the book project going, and they suddenly start moving into another project, and maybe it gets accelerated either because they got a grant or because it becomes a really timely, topic or something like that. And then suddenly they take off with that second book, and then they return to the first book, later on. So there's a lot of different ways, but I would say most people, it's going to be rooted in the dissertations.
Thanks again. So this is kind of actually linking to the question about the paratextual media. if you're analyzing a popular educational documentary or something that is very popular, have you ever run into issues where there were copyright issues or concerns? Because it's public, it's out there in the public, right? But at the same time, it is another person's work that you are not evaluating, but you are analyzing, right? So have you had any experience with that? Any
Are you
warnings?
talking about the analysis of it in the book or using it in a like?
Oh, analysis of it in the book. Sorry, not.
And including quotes or
Mm-hmm.
movie stills and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm.
This is something where there's a lot of variation among presses.
Yes.
Some presses are, they don't rely on fair use, which we find really strange. And so some presses will insist on getting permissions, but really there is this robust fair use set of laws that exist and are there for scholars. And we are a fair use first press. We encourage our authors to claim fair use for any work that they're analyzing. And if it's part of your analysis, part of your argument, it is fair use. There are times when you might have to have some caution if you know that if it's a song and you're trying to reproduce the entire song and so there are times where you might have to be a little bit more careful.
You try to use a small percentage of the whole. There are these different factors to take into consideration in evaluating fair use, and it's always kind of like balancing risks. And I agree with you about just it's important to continue to push the boundaries of fair use because it's a sort of collective practice.
The use it or lose it proposition.
Yeah.
If you are not, claiming fair use on a regular basis, then it erodes.
Right. So you can over permission things and that becomes then the practice and that's hard on everyone. So you'll hear about, the publishers and their draconian copyrights that they guard so strongly, but actually now you're hearing the other side of that. Actually, publishers really believe in fair use because it supports, it encourages scholarship and the conversation. So you can find out about it. Oh, sorry. You can find out more about it on the U.S. copyright website.
Yep, U.S. Copyright Office. Yep.
The factors that go into fair use. And then you could ask many different lawyers and many different people whether your particular situation, if you're interpreting it right or not. So at a certain point, you just have to take the leap. But also many universities have someone at the library who specializes in copyright. And Duke has a copyright librarian who's also a lawyer, and you can talk to her for free. And librarians also push fair use as a place where publishers and librarians agree.
And some libraries have good sites too. Stanford in particular has a good site.
Right.
Duke Press has a free ebook. Also, that's what I wanted to shout out. Library, yes. And we have a free ebook available. It's called Bound by Law. You can find it on the Duke Press website and it'll link you out to a PDF.
Right. Yeah, a lot of university presses really are very hands-off and they won't advise you on it. It's kind of, I've always found it kind of surprising. In your contract, you sign that you assert that you have the right to publish everything that's in your manuscript. And so it's really on you. And some publishers will help you more than others when it comes down to the individual decisions about the quotations and the excerpts that you're including.
So we're close to time, but I see one last question, if we could. And then we have a reception, so you can continue talking. Right.
Hello, thank you. I will be short and quick. Thank you so much for this overview. But now I was thinking from a different perspective, from a geographical perspective. I am someone who has worked on like India specifically, but my academic audience is in the UK as well as in India because the scholarship is India. Now, currently, I'm also working with on the kind of US kind of focus. My idea of writing my first book, because I just passed my dissertation 5 months ago, so and now this new thing. So my idea of thinking my book is to kind of bring these different dissertation that I had and the current ongoing work that I'm doing, because it links to the larger global capital story, because I study Amazon warehouses and like labor conditions and the resistance that we see to these newer workplaces. So I kind of see this is a global story to connect. But when I'm thinking of the presses, someone in London, they said, "Oh, you should go with Cambridge University Press, Oxford University Press." Like they didn't give me any other idea except to say, "Oh, they have a market in India. Like they do much more publications and publicizing of the work in India too." So then, how do we new people who are just coming, and how do we kind of think through those aspects of the reachability and that? Thank you.
Audience potentially.
Yeah. So we do publish our books worldwide, and the South Asian market is a little bit different than some of the other English-speaking markets because we partner with a lot of local presses. So there's been variability. Some presses, we used to be able to count on certain presses to bring out a lot of our South Asian studies list. That's been shifting, but that's always something that we think about with books on South Asia, to think about which presses.
Partner presses
Partner
to
presses.
co-publish with.
Exactly.
And if you have an idea of a particular potential partner press in some part of the world, say you're publishing on Spain and you know the right publisher in Barcelona or something, your American press would like to hear about that.
Yeah, and it's definitely something to ask an editor about. What is your distribution? What does distribution look like? And you can get some very concrete answers, and it will look different for Oxford. OUP is going to have a South Asian, imprint versus, Duke is going to have a different relationship to South Asian publishers. So I think that's just a question for the editor. I mean, and also to think about, both the global aspect of the material versus the audience that you're writing for. So obviously there's going to be some overlap in those two things, but they're also distinct. So you can imagine okay, who's my audience? Where are they in the world? You know what I mean? And then also what am I writing about in this kind of global way, and who, which audiences do I have sort of interdisciplinary audiences that may be situated in different places. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. But I'm going to take, just the prerogative of having the mic to give a kind of more personal thing than maybe it's normally the case. So this is, obviously partly in part to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the press. But I think all the conversations have been about, the social relationships, the intellectual connections that make, this thing we know as, a book or at the press or the university. And I was just thinking, I know you guys haven't worked at the press for 100 years, but maybe not many of you individually. Right, but maybe all together, and Sylvia as well. I'm just, all of you guys here are getting decades of distilled experience and wisdom, and I have no desire to write a book, but I felt I learned so much. I learned so much today, and I go to a lot of these things. Today I heard things and I was like, oh wow, I never thought about that. So I just, I'm just so touched by, I don't know why I'm having such an emotional reaction to publishing fundamentals, but I just want to say thank you so much, Courtney, Gisela, Sylvia.